And now for my next number, I'd like to return to the
classic. Time.
Hello, vinyl community. Alex back again. I know, so soon. This time I thought I'd jump on the movie soundtrack tag that Beth over at Redrum Records has started. This is like the second one, I think, so I guess it's the 2021 movie tag. I think I did the last movie tag that she did. I don't really remember, but this one had a few questions that were a bit harder to answer. And there's one where I've had to sort of bend the question a little bit because as hard as I tried, I just couldn't find an answer. But anyway, let's get to this. Beth has a great channel, talks about a lot of soundtracks over there, and gives you, she keeps you up to date on what soundtracks are coming out on vinyl and whatnot. So yeah, I figured in honor of her and her channel, I'll jump on this. So I'm going to try and remember the questions off the top of my head here. If I forget, I may have to quickly pause the camera and go and look a question up. But anyway, let's get into it. So the first question was the oldest soundtrack that you own. Now, take that how you will. I went with the oldest movie soundtrack, not the pressing itself, but the actual year the film came out. So I'm going with 1940s Fantasia. It's either 1940 or 1941 originally, I can't quite remember. But I know it came out in the 1940s. Disney's third film, I believe. Obviously, when the movie came out, vinyl records weren't really a thing. It was all shellac, and I don't know how many tracks you can press onto a shellac record, but yeah, this is the soundtrack to Walt Disney's Fantasia. I try and collect as many of these Disney soundtracks as I can. I'm not doing a very good job, but this is a great one. This is very, very nice. Yeah, it is an 80s pressing of the soundtrack, like I said, because obviously back when the film came out, vinyl was not being pressed. It was all on 78s at that time. But what I really like about the soundtrack is that it's conducted by a 121-piece symphony orchestra and a 50-voice choir. So yeah, it's a very, very much a very classical based soundtrack, like really, really classical based, but fantastic soundtrack nonetheless. So film wise, this is the oldest, and if you want to go off pressing, then it is technically Exodus for me, but when the movie came out, Fantasia, I think it's 1940 or 1941. But yeah, that is the oldest movie soundtrack I own. Second question. A soundtrack that needs a reissue or a first time pressing on vinyl. And originally I was going to go with Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels because I quite enjoy that film and there's a lot of great songs on that soundtrack. But I didn't realise that it was reissued like 3 years ago. But one soundtrack I do like, and this is going to be a bit controversial here, but Fantastic Four, the 2005 version of Fantastic Four, while it's not a very good film, it's just okay to me. The soundtrack is really, really incredible. You've got tracks from Alter Bridge on here, Sum 41, Velvet Revolver, Taking Back Sunday. Joss Stone's got a track on here randomly. Yeah, I quite enjoy this soundtrack, and it's only available on CD. So I would love for this to get a vinyl pressing. Yeah, there's 19 tracks, so it'd have to be like a 2 vinyl pressing, maybe even 3. But you know, it was one of my favourite films growing up. Now I look back, the film's not that great, but I like the soundtrack anyway, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, I really wish that soundtrack had a vinyl pressing. Next question is the most valuable record you have. So this could, or soundtrack that you have. This can be either sentimentally or just overall value, what it's worth and stuff. For me, I've gone with one that kind of fills in both, because not only is it the most valuable soundtrack I have. Like, if you look on Discogs of any of these soundtracks, it is the most expensive that people try and get the most money for. But I also have a really soft spot for this movie, and that is The Dark Knight from 2008. This is an original pressing from 2008. So yeah, that explains why it's so expensive. This one fluctuates in price a little bit though. I talked about this one in a video I did a couple weeks ago on my most valuable records in my collection. I touch on this one there. And it's not the full soundtrack either, because the film is, I think it's about 2.5 hours. And obviously you can't fit 2.5 hours worth of music onto a 2 vinyl set. I think it's literally about an hour's worth of film of the soundtrack. But I love this film. I remember watching it when it came out, and we were doing music in school, and we were told to take notes on the soundtrack and how it fitted the film and what was going on. But I just couldn't. I was too mesmerised by the film to make any notes on what the film was going on. And this is why I love Hans Zimmer's scores so much. Is it Hans Zimmer who did the score for this one? Yeah. And James Newton Howard, who also did the soundtrack to Nightcrawler. Another favourite film of mine, but we'll talk about that some other time. Hans Zimmer did the score for this, and Christopher Nolan directed it. And because of this film, I love Hans Zimmer's scores, and I like anything that Christopher Nolan has done movie-wise. So this film is so sentimental to me, and funny enough, is my favourite Batman film, and maybe my second favourite film of all time. I know it's not everyone's favourite Batman, the people that grew up with like Michael Keaton's Batman, or even Adam West's Batman. But for me personally, this is my favourite interpretation of Batman. And Heath Ledger's Joker has got to be my favourite Joker as well. So there's that one. But yeah, The Dark Knight is the most valuable soundtrack I own. The next question is your favourite bargain bin soundtrack, like a soundtrack you see all the time. And while there's a couple I have, some of the soundtracks that I used to find in bargain bins have now gone up drastically in price. So I was going to put Saturday Night Fever here, but now that's like a £20 soundtrack. It's ridiculous. But one that I do see all the time, particularly in my area, and it's always cheap as well because you see it all the time, that's the soundtrack to The Magnificent Seven, Return of the Seven. This is a reissue on Sunset Records. Oh, sorry, excuse me. I had a tickly nose. But yeah, as I was saying, Magnificent Seven, Return of the Seven, great Western film. Love the Magnificent Seven films, even the modern day remake of it, with Denzel Washington and even Ethan Hawke in it. That's a great remake in my opinion. But yeah, Magnificent Seven, really, really good film. The score is incredible, and despite what you see from the cover, the vinyl was mint. That's why I picked this one up. Because people know I don't care too much about the cover. But yeah, The Magnificent Seven, this one I see everywhere, like literally either £2 or less. That's how easy it is to find. And I see it when record stores and charity shops are open. I probably saw this about 3-4 times a week when I went in there. Like it's that common. Next one is your favorite colored vinyl soundtrack, and I'm kind of going to include some TV show soundtracks in this as well because I have some of them, and yeah, they just really, really are good. But this one in particular, I wanted to talk about because it is one of my favorite shows. That's Stranger Things. This is the soundtrack to season 2. I don't have the soundtrack from season 1, but I do have 3, and I can't wait for season 4 to come out on Netflix. Although this is my least favourite season so far of the show, it's my favourite score, funny enough, from the show, which is ridiculous. But the main reason that I'm going off coloured vinyl here is because you will see in just a moment why I like this so much. And some people may not like this as much, but I really love that splatter effect of the blue and the white on the clear. I think it looks incredible. I'm a sucker for clear vinyl, I really am, and this one I cannot express enough. I actually really like this soundtrack. So yeah, Stranger Things. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, particularly my partner's not a fan really of Stranger Things, but I quite like the show. I have done since the first season. The second season kind of lost me a little, but the third season really won me back on the show. So yeah, but the second season of Stranger Things, that is what I'm picking as my my favourite coloured soundtrack, at least for this video. Next question is a cover you love or the artwork on a soundtrack, and for me I went with the soundtrack to Cowboy Bebop, my favourite anime show. I mean, just look at that cover for a start. And I like how the main character here, Spike, is like just chilling with a cigarette in like the background, and you've got one of his companions on the cover. Really cool. There's all of his companions on the back there. The soundtrack itself, the reason I'm picking the artwork here over the actual colour of the vinyl is because the coloured vinyl is pretty cool. But what I didn't realise when I was gifted this is it's not the full sound. It's not the soundtrack to the full TV show. It's got stuff from the movie as well, Cowboy Bebop the movie, and even stuff from the video game, which I'd never played. So that's why when I was listening to it, I'm like, I don't remember some of these from the show. And then I went back and rewatched the show, and they weren't in it. So I was like, what's going on here? And then I did some, and then Brad from H2 Vinyl showed this, and he said it even had stuff from the movie and the video game. So I was like, oh, that will be why. But yeah, but I really do like the cover. It's still my favourite soundtrack. It's still my favourite anime show. I just really wish they put the full soundtrack to the show on vinyl and not randomly include stuff from the movie or the video game. But yeah, that's Cowboy Bebop. That's the soundtrack to that. Next one, a composer you think is really underrated, and for me, I was going to go with who I talked about earlier, James Michael Howard, who did soundtracks to who co-did the soundtrack with Hans Zimmer to The Dark Knight and did Nightcrawler. But I found another one I really wanted to talk about, and I really like this guy's scores, even if his movies can be a little bit lackluster sometimes. But the name is Michael Giacchino. I'm probably butchering that name like massively, but yeah, he did the soundtrack to 2 of the modern Star Trek films. He did Beyond and Into Darkness. He did the soundtrack to Rogue One. He's done a few other sci-fi soundtracks, I believe. But yeah, this one I really like. I had to grab this. My least favourite of the modern 3 Star Trek films, but it was the cheapest soundtrack of them all, so that's the one I ended up getting. But yeah, I think he's a really underrated name and one I think should be talked about a little bit more. Yeah, so yeah, Star Trek Beyond soundtrack. Michael Giacchino, for a composer I think is really underrated. So we should be on like question 8 now, I believe. Yeah. A soundtrack with a song that's your jam. I wanted to show The Greatest Showman because that soundtrack, when it came out, not only was it everywhere, like if you went out in the clubs or in the pubs or anywhere, you'd hear songs from The Greatest Showman. It didn't, in shops, didn't matter where you went. Like the only time you wouldn't hear The Greatest Showman soundtrack being played is if you didn't go out. And it kind of stuck with me, and the song The Greatest Show from The Greatest Showman is a song that I quite literally jam out to anytime it comes on. But because I couldn't show that soundtrack, I had to pick something else. And of course, Saturday Night Fever, the song in question is Staying Alive. A pretty obvious answer, I know, but whenever it comes on in my headphones, I start like strutting and stuff like John Travolta does in the film at the beginning of the film, Saturday Night Fever. So yeah, literally, and this soundtrack is the reason I love the Bee Gees so much, because of the song Staying Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, and Jive Talking. Oh, and Night Fever, which is on here as well. But yeah, brilliant soundtrack, and has a lot of my jams on here, but particularly Staying Alive is the one that I will jam out to, and I'll even do the strut to if I'm walking down the street and the song comes on in my headphones. I won't even care. Next question is 2 soundtracks that use 2 different versions of a song. This is the one question I couldn't quite answer because I didn't have any soundtracks that had anything in common. What I did have was one soundtrack with 2 different versions of the same song. So I'm going to show that instead. So Beth, I'm sorry if you're not happy with that, but it's all I've got to answer the question, and that is the soundtrack to Baby Driver. One of my favourite films. Edgar Wright did this film. He famously did Shaun of the Dead, if you ever saw that movie. But yeah, this is a great song, and I'm not talking about this is a great soundtrack. I'm not talking about the 2 different versions of Deborah that are on here, because they're obviously 2 completely different songs. Because you got Deborah by Beck and Deborah by T-Rex. They are completely different, even have completely different titles and spellings of the name Deborah. What I'm actually talking about is the song Easy. One obviously has the original version by the Commodores, and a version on here sung by one of the cast members, Sky Ferreira. Now, she's not in the movie a whole lot. She's in it for maybe 1 or 2 clips, but she has a version of Easy by the Commodores that she covers, and both of them feature on the soundtrack. So of course I had to get it. I mean, it's just a soundtrack that I play. It's probably my most played soundtrack as well, just because there's so much on it. But yeah, that's my answers to that one. That's the only one I can really come up with. Anyway, last question. A soundtrack that you can part with. Now, one you just don't listen to anymore. And for me, this one was pretty easy because I thought it was different to what it actually was, and that's the soundtrack to Mary Poppins. But this isn't actually the soundtrack to Mary Poppins. This is cover versions of songs from Mary Poppins, which I don't really like. I guess it's what I get for not looking at it properly. But it still came out the same year as the film, but it's just the cover versions of the songs from Mary Poppins, and I'm not a massive fan of that. I wanted the original soundtrack, but I'll track that down at some point and I'll add that to my collection. But until then, I'm going to keep hold of this one, just because I don't have any other means of Mary Poppins, and it's a Disney soundtrack that I didn't have. So yeah, Mary Poppins. That's the one I could probably part with. Anyway, that's it for this video, guys. Thanks so much for tuning back into the channel. Sorry if I rambled on a little bit with some of the answers there, but I kind of had some explaining to do for some of them. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you're new here, give this video a thumbs up. And yeah, I'll see you guys again very soon. Bye.